The fork slipped from Mom's trembling fingers, clattering against her china plate as she stared at my phone screen. I should have been faster, should have locked it before she reached across the dinner table, but the damage was already done. Dad's jaw tightened as he leaned over to look at the photo she'd intercepted. Ron's tattooed arm wrapped around my shoulders, his rough smile captured in that golden hour light we'd chased last weekend. The silence in our dining room felt suffocating, pressing down on my chest until I couldn't breathe properly. Talon, Dad finally spoke, and his voice carried a coldness I'd never heard directed at me before. This embarrassment will not continue under our roof. My throat constricted. I tried to form words, tried to explain that Ron wasn't what they thought, that beneath the ink and leather existed the kindest soul I'd ever encountered. But Mom cut me off before I could begin, tears already streaming down her carefully made-up face. "We raised you with values, with standards," she whispered, her voice breaking. "And you chose a thug." That word hit me like a physical blow. Thug. They'd reduced the man I loved to a single ugly label without ever meeting him, without giving him a chance. Ron wasn't a thug, he was different. Yes, existing outside their narrow definition of acceptable, but he was real in ways I'd never experienced before. I wanted to defend him, wanted to make them see what I saw, but Dad's raised hand silenced me. "Pack your things. Tonight." The finality in those 3 words shattered something inside me. My own father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped with homework, was throwing me out. For loving someone. For choosing my own path. Later that night, my phone buzzed with Ron's text. "How was dinner?" I stared at those 3 simple words until they blurred. How could I tell him that dinner had destroyed everything? That I was currently shoving clothes into a duffel bag, while my mother sobbed in the next room and my father stood guard at my door like I was a criminal? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but no response felt adequate. Eventually, I just turned off my phone. By morning, my suitcase sat outside the front gate like abandoned trash. I stood there for a moment, looking up at the house where I'd grown up, where every window held memories that now felt tainted. The bedroom where I'd studied for exams, the kitchen where Mom had taught me to bake, the living room where we'd watched movies as a family. All of it belonged to a different life now. I was a stranger evicted from my own history. The college housing office managed to find me a cramped room in the temporary dormitory, the kind reserved for emergency situations and students awaiting permanent placement. The mattress was thin, the walls were stained, and the whole place smelled faintly of mildew and disappointment. I sat on the edge of the bed as sunset painted the grimy window orange, and realized I couldn't cry. The hurt went too deep for tears, settling into my bones as a hollow ache. When Ron found out, I never discovered how, maybe mutual friends or campus gossip, he appeared outside the dormitory within an hour. I heard his motorcycle before I saw him, that distinctive rumble cutting through the evening quiet. Through my window, I watched him remove his helmet, black leather jacket catching the streetlight, tattoos visible on his forearms as he ran a hand through his dark hair. He looked up, somehow sensing which window was mine, and the concern in his eyes made my chest tight. I met him at the entrance, and his first words were gentle enough to break through my numbness. "Talon," he said softly, like my name was something precious, "this isn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." But I felt wrong. Felt like I'd failed some fundamental test of being a good son. When I finally broke down, Ron pulled me into his arms with a fierceness that felt protective rather than possessive. He held me tight enough that I could feel his heartbeat, steady and sure, and for a moment I felt safe despite everything falling apart. "They'll come around," he whispered against my hair. I wanted to believe him, wanted to think my parents' love was strong enough to overcome their prejudice. But doubt gnawed at me. What if they never accepted us? What if I just lost my family forever? The next day at college proved even worse than I'd anticipated. Somehow the story had spread. Small campus, big gossip network, and everywhere I walked, conversations stopped and started in my wake. In the cafeteria line, someone behind me stage whispered, "Heard his parents kicked him out. Guess they found out about his criminal boyfriend." My face burned with humiliation. I grabbed my tray and tried to find an empty table, but the stares followed me everywhere. This was my life now, judgment and whispers, shame and speculation. Then Ron appeared, walking straight through the cafeteria like he owned it, completely unbothered by the attention his presence commanded. He sat down across from me, reached across the table to take my hand and said loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "Let them talk. We know the truth." The simple act of him claiming me publicly, of not hiding or apologizing for our relationship, steadied something inside me. Maybe I was losing one family, but I was gaining something else, someone who chose me without conditions, who stood beside me even when it cost him his reputation too. That evening, alone in my depressing dorm room, I replayed Ron's words. Maybe he was right about my parents eventually coming around. Maybe they just needed time to realize their mistake. But a persistent voice in the back of my mind kept asking the question I was afraid to confront. What if they never changed? What if this was permanent? I looked around the small room that was now my entire world, so different from the comfortable bedroom I'd left behind, with its full bookshelves and familiar posters. Everything had changed in less than 24 hours. My phone sat silent on the desk. Neither parent had called or texted. The silence felt like its own kind of rejection, a confirmation that they'd meant every word. Outside my window, the campus stretched into darkness, dotted with warm lights from dorm rooms where other students lived their normal lives. They had parents who called to check in, families expecting them home for holidays, support systems that didn't come with ultimatums. I'd taken all of that for granted until it vanished. Ron texted again, "You okay?" This time I responded, "Getting there." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. I wasn't okay, might not be okay for a long time, but I was surviving. And maybe, with Ron beside me, surviving would eventually transform into something more like living. Ron's apartment became my refuge during the following week, though I initially resisted his invitation to stay there. "The dorm is fine," I'd insisted, even though we both knew that was a lie. The temporary housing was slowly crushing my spirit with its peeling paint and constant noise from neighbors who seemed to exist on a schedule opposite to human norms. "Talon," Ron had said, his voice patient but firm, "you don't have to suffer just to prove you can handle this alone. Come stay with me. No strings, no pressure. Just let me help." So I'd agreed, and now I stood in his small but immaculately clean apartment, taking in details I'd never noticed during previous visits. The place reflected Ron's personality perfectly: minimal furniture, everything functional, but with unexpected touches of warmth. A bookshelf crammed with worn paperbacks, a vintage record player in the corner, plants thriving on the windowsill despite his supposedly busy schedule. I watched him move through the kitchen making coffee, his tattooed arms flexing as he worked. The morning light caught the intricate designs. I could see a phoenix rising from flames on his left forearm, geometric patterns wrapping around his right bicep, something that looked like coordinates on his wrist. Each one seemed deliberate, meaningful. "Ron," I asked hesitantly, "do people always misunderstand you because of how you look?" He glanced over his shoulder, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Every single day, Talon. But I stopped letting other people's assumptions define me years ago." His certainty amazed me. How did someone become that confident, that unbothered by judgment? I was still reeling from my parents' rejection, still felt raw from the cafeteria whispers, and here was Ron acting like the world's opinions were irrelevant noise. The coffee maker gurgled as he poured 2 mugs, handing me one before settling onto the couch beside me. "You'll get there too," he added quietly. "Give yourself time." 3 days into living with Ron, a letter arrived forwarded from my dorm address. I recognized Dad's handwriting immediately, and my hands started shaking before I even opened the envelope. Inside, his message was brief and devastating. "Until you admit your mistake and return home alone, we have no relationship. This is your choice to make." The words blurred as I read them twice, 3 times, trying to find some hidden softness I'd missed. But there was none. My father had drawn a line in permanent ink: him or Ron, family or love, conformity or authenticity. No middle ground, no room for negotiation. Ron found me on the couch, still holding the letter, tears finally breaking through the numbness I'd been carrying. He didn't say anything at first, just took the letter from my trembling fingers and read it himself. His expression remained neutral, controlled, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. "You deserve better than conditional love," he said eventually, and something in his voice suggested he was speaking from experience, from his own deep well of pain. That night I asked about his family. The question had been hovering between us for a while, but I'd never felt entitled to ask until now, until I'd lost my own. Ron was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I don't have any, he finally admitted. Lost them when I was 16. Car accident. The air left my lungs. Here I was drowning in self-pity over parents who were still alive but choosing to reject me, while Ron had faced actual permanent loss. No wonder he seemed so much older than his years, so steady in crisis. He'd survived the unsurvivable. That's why you get it, I whispered. Why you understand that blood doesn't always mean family. He nodded, reaching for my hand. When you lose everything early, you learn what actually matters. And what matters is how people treat you, not what they're called or how you're related to them. The philosophy made sense intellectually, but emotionally I was still grieving, still hoping, stupidly, that my parents would wake up and realize their mistake. As days blended into a week, I began understanding Ron's world better. His garage wasn't just a workplace. It was a sanctuary for people like him, people who didn't fit conventional molds. I'd meet him there after classes, watching him work with a focus and precision that contradicted every thug stereotype. His routine surprised me most. Every morning he woke at 5, worked out with dedicated intensity, then headed to the garage by 7. Evenings he spent reading, everything from philosophy to mechanics manuals, constantly learning, constantly improving. This supposed dropout, this assumed delinquent, was more disciplined than anyone I'd known at college. Where did you learn this structure? I asked one evening, watching him methodically clean his tools before closing the garage. Necessity, he replied simply. When you're alone, you either create order or you drown in chaos. I chose order. I found myself falling deeper for him each day, not despite his differences, but because of them. He'd built himself from nothing, created meaning from loss, maintained integrity when society expected him to fail. My parents saw tattoos and leather. I saw strength and survival, but their voices still echoed in my head during weak moments. Thug, embarrassment, mistake, their judgment had infected my thoughts, making me question my own perception even as I watched Ron prove them wrong daily. One night, I confessed this to him. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just rebelling, if they're right about me being naive. Ron set down his book and looked at me steadily. Talon, I can't make you trust your own judgment. That's something you have to choose. But I can tell you this. I've never once lied to you about who I am. Everything you see is real. Whether that's enough for you, only you can decide. His honesty gutted me. He wasn't going to convince me or manipulate my feelings. He was putting the choice squarely in my hands. Trust myself or trust my parents' prejudice. Choose love or choose approval. That night I chose trust. I chose to believe what I'd experienced over what I'd been told to believe. It felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously. The world beyond Ron's apartment still judged us. My parents maintained their silence. College classmates continued their whispers. But inside these walls I was learning what it meant to be chosen without conditions. To be valued for who I actually was rather than who I was supposed to be. It wasn't the family I'd grown up with, but maybe it was the family I'd been searching for all along. The garage sat on the eastern edge of town, tucked between a laundromat and an abandoned warehouse, easy to miss if you didn't know where to look. Ron had been inviting me to visit for weeks, but I'd always found excuses: too much homework, too tired, too whatever. Truth was, I'd been nervous about entering his world completely, about seeing the place where he spent most of his waking hours. What if it shattered the image I'd built of him? What if my parents were somehow right? But Saturday morning he'd simply said, "Come with me today," and something in his tone made refusal impossible. The garage was larger inside than it appeared from the street. The space organized with impressive efficiency. 3 motorcycles in various stages of repair occupied the main floor. Tools arranged on pegboards like surgical instruments. The scent of oil and metal hanging thick in the air. But what caught my attention wasn't the mechanical aspect. It was the people. A young guy, maybe 19, sat on a stool near the back, talking while Ron worked on a carburetor. "I'm 3 months behind on rent," he was saying, voice tight with stress. "Landlord's threatening eviction next week." Ron didn't look up from his work, hands moving with practiced precision. "How much?" $1,500. "But I'm not asking I'll have it for you Monday," Ron interrupted calmly. Pay me back when you can. The guy's eyes widened. Ron, I can't. You can and you will. No interest, no timeline. Just get yourself stable. I watched this exchange from the doorway. Something shifting in my chest. This wasn't charity, it was community. People taking care of people. Ron never once acted like he was doing a favor. He treated financial help the same way he'd hand someone a wrench, just another tool to fix a problem. Another regular, a woman named Mara with purple streaks in her hair, stopped by around noon with lunch, homemade sandwiches she'd prepared as thanks for Ron fixing her bike for free last month. They chatted about her sister's medical bills, and I watched Ron discreetly slip an envelope into her bag when she wasn't looking. This happened all day. People came and went, some for actual mechanical work, others clearly just needing a place where they weren't judged, where their struggles were met with practical solutions instead of empty sympathy. The garage functioned as part repair shop, part community center, part sanctuary for everyone society had labeled as other. Your boyfriend's pretty special, Nara told me during a quiet moment. Her smile, genuine, helped me when I had nowhere else to turn. By evening, when we finally returned to Ron's apartment, I was seeing him through completely new eyes. The question burst out of me before I could filter it. Why do you do so much for everyone else? When do you ever take care of yourself? Ron paused in the kitchen doorway, considering his answer. When he spoke, his voice carried weight beyond the words. When you've survived hell alone, Talon, you learn to pull others out whenever you can. Nobody should have to drown when someone's capable of extending a hand. We ended up on the roof that night, a secret access point Ron had discovered when he first moved in. The city sprawled below us, lights creating constellations against the darkness. I leaned against his shoulder, feeling his warmth seep through his jacket, and for the first time since being kicked out, I felt genuinely peaceful. Then my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen, her third call that week. Talon, please come home, she said when I answered, her voice thick with tears. The house feels so empty without you. We miss you terribly. My resolve wavered. This was what I'd been waiting for, wasn't it? Some sign that they regretted their decision, that family could be repaired. Ron can come too, I offered hopefully. The silence stretched long enough to hurt. Then, sweetheart, no, just you. This would be so much easier if you'd just... I ended the call mid-sentence, my hand shaking. Easier for them, she meant. Easier if I abandoned the person I loved, if I prioritized their comfort over my own integrity. The conditional nature of their affection had never been clearer. Ron understood without explanation. He pulled me against his chest, one hand moving soothingly through my hair. Take all the time you need, he murmured. I'm not going anywhere. The next morning, college felt different. Maybe I'd finally stopped caring about the whispers, or maybe I'd just accepted that people would judge regardless of what I did. Either way, their opinions felt less suffocating. I was checking the communications board between classes when a poster caught my attention. The annual alumni event where successful graduates return to inspire current students. The speaker lineup included several notable names, but one made my vision tunnel: Ron Mercer, founder, Mercer Security Solutions. My brain couldn't process the information. Ron Mercer, Security Solutions, founder. None of those words connected to the Ron I knew, the mechanic with the garage, the guy who wore leather jackets and fixed bikes. But there was his name, printed in official university lettering, accompanied by a corporate headshot I'd never seen before. In the photo, he wore a suit, his hair styled differently, tattoos presumably hidden beneath expensive fabric. He looked like a completely different person, or maybe like a person with completely different facets than I'd known. My hands fumbled for my phone, dialing Ron's number with shaking fingers. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I tried again. Same results. By the 3rd attempt, I was nearly hyperventilating in the middle of the hallway. A security firm founder. That implied wealth, status, corporate success, everything opposite to the life I thought Ron lived. Had he been lying to me, testing me somehow? Or was there a completely reasonable explanation I was too panicked to imagine? The rest of the day crawled by in agonizing slowness. I couldn't focus on lectures, couldn't eat lunch, couldn't think about anything except that poster and what it meant. When classes finally ended, I practically ran to Ron's apartment, using the key he'd given me to let myself in. He arrived 20 minutes later, and the look on my face must have told him something was wrong immediately. "What happened?" he asked, dropping his bag by the door. I held up my phone, showing him a photo I'd taken of the poster. "Want to explain this?" Ron's expression shifted not to guilt, but to resignation. Like he'd been expecting this conversation but hoping it would come later on his terms. "Yeah," he said quietly, moving to the couch and gesturing for me to sit. "I think we need to talk." Ron settled onto the couch beside me, maintaining enough distance to give me space but close enough that I could see the conflict playing across his features. "I didn't lie to you," he began, his voice carefully measured. "But I didn't tell you everything either, and I need you to understand why." My phone still displayed the poster image, that corporate version of Ron I'd never encountered, polished and professional in ways that contradicted everything I thought I knew. The disconnect between that photograph and the man sitting beside me in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt felt insurmountable. "Start from the beginning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the confusion churning through me. Ron leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling as if gathering his thoughts from somewhere beyond this room. "Mercer Security Solutions started 7 years ago. I was 21, fresh out of a coding boot camp I'd scraped together money for. After my parents died, had this idea about cybersecurity protocols that nobody else was implementing, protection systems that could predict breaches before they happened." He paused and I waited, watching emotions flicker across his face. Pride mixed with something darker, more complicated. The company grew faster than I ever imagined. Within 2 years we had government contracts, Fortune 500 clients, international offices. By 23 I was worth more money than I knew what to do with. His jaw tightened. And that's when everything changed. People who'd never given me the time of day suddenly wanted to be my best friend. Women approached me at events and I could practically see dollar signs in their eyes. Everyone wanted something: investment opportunities, partnerships, introductions, access. I started to understand, but the hurt still felt raw. "So you created an alter ego?" "Not exactly." Ron finally looked at me, and the vulnerability in his gaze made my breath catch. "The garage, the bikes, the tattoos, that's not fake, Talon. That's who I actually am. The corporate side, the suits and speeches, that's the mask I wear because the business requires it. That when I'm at the garage, when I'm fixing engines and helping people who need it, that's when I feel real." He shifted closer and I noticed his hands were trembling slightly. The first sign of uncertainty I'd seen from him. After a few years of watching people treat me like an ATM instead of a person, I made a decision. In my professional life, I'd be Ron Mercer, CEO. But in my real life, I'd just be Ron. No last name, no company credentials, no wealth on display. I wanted to find people who'd care about me without knowing what I could do for them financially. The explanation made sense logically, but emotionally I felt manipulated. "You were testing me." "No." His response came quick and firm. "I was testing the world, Talon. Everyone except you. Because from the first time we met, at that campus coffee shop, you treated me like I mattered without knowing anything about my bank account. You fell for the guy who fixes motorcycles and reads philosophy books, not the guy who signs 7-figure contracts." Memory surfaced. Our first conversation 3 months ago, when he'd helped me pick up scattered papers after I'd tripped on the cafe steps. He'd been wearing paint-stained jeans and smelled faintly of motor oil, and we'd ended up talking for 2 hours about everything except careers or money. I'd been drawn to his intensity, his thoughtfulness, the way he listened like my words actually mattered. "I never cared about what you did for work," I said quietly. "I cared about who you were when we talked. How you made me feel seen." "Exactly." Ron reached for my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. "You're the first person in years who saw me instead of my net worth. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How valuable?" My anger began dissolving, replaced by understanding tinged with sadness. Ron had built walls to protect himself from being used, and I'd accidentally scaled them without even knowing they existed. "The company runs mostly without me now," he continued. "I have an exceptional team, appear for major decisions and quarterly presentations, handle the alumni speaking events when the university asks. But my real life is the garage. The community there, fixing things that matter." He squeezed my hand. And you're my real life, Talon. The declaration should have felt romantic, but questions still nagged at me. What happens now? Do my parents need to know? Does this change anything between us? Ron considered this carefully. That's entirely up to you. I can remain just Ron, or I can be Ron Mercer, whichever helps your situation. But I need you to decide based on what you want, not what you think will fix your family. The choice felt heavy. Part of me wanted to rush to my parents immediately, shove evidence of Ron's success in their faces, force them to see how wrong they'd been. But another part recognized that as validation-seeking, as trying to win their approval by their standards rather than my own. I need time to process this, I admitted. Take all the time you need. Ron's acceptance came without pressure or expectation, which somehow made the decision harder. That night I barely slept, mind racing through possibilities and implications. By morning I'd reached a conclusion that surprised me. I wanted my parents to know, not to prove them wrong, but to show them the person I'd chosen was worthy of respect on any measure they valued. The next afternoon I walked to my childhood home for the first time since being expelled from it. Dad was in the front garden, trimming rose bushes with methodical precision. He looked up as I approached, surprise and something like hope crossing his features. Talon. My name sounded tentative coming from him. We need to talk about Ron, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Everything you think about him is wrong. He's not some delinquent or criminal. He runs Mercer Security Solutions. You might have heard of it. They handle cybersecurity for half the companies in your investment portfolio. I'd done my research that morning, discovered just how extensive Ron's professional reputation was. The company had been featured in major business publications, won industry awards, pioneered technologies that were now industry standard. Dad's expression shifted from surprise to skepticism. Talon, I understand you want to defend him, but making up elaborate stories, I'm not making anything up. Frustration boiled over. Check for yourself. Google the company. Look at the leadership page. See his face on their website. He's brilliant and successful and kind, and you judged him based on tattoos and a leather jacket. But Dad was already shaking his head, that familiar stubborn set to his jaw. These people are clever, son. They create fake identities, impressive-looking websites. He's gotten into your head, convinced you of an elaborate fiction. The accusations stung worse than outright rejection. He thought I was gullible, easily deceived, too naive to recognize manipulation. Nothing I said would convince him because he'd already decided the truth. I left without another word, my brief hope crushed under the weight of his refusal to even consider being wrong. Ron was waiting when I returned to the apartment, and one look at my face told him everything. He pulled me into an embrace without speaking, and I let myself sink into his solidity. They won't listen, I said against his shoulder. Dad thinks you've created some elaborate con. I'm sorry. Ron's voice rumbled through his chest. You don't need to prove anything to them about me. My worth isn't dependent on their approval. But I want them to see. I know. He pulled back enough to look at me. But maybe this isn't about making them see. Maybe it's about you deciding that their vision doesn't matter more than your own. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and something flickered across his face. The university just confirmed, charity gala next Saturday. They want me to speak about entrepreneurship and social responsibility. Our eyes met, and understanding passed between us without words. Your parents will be there, I said. It wasn't a question. Events like that always drew the local elite, and my parents never missed networking opportunities. Yes. Ron set his phone aside. This is your call, Talon. I can request they keep my attendance low profile, or we can attend together and let the chips fall where they may. The decision crystallized with sudden clarity. I want to go. With you. Let them see the truth, even if they refuse to accept it beforehand. Ron studied my face, searching for certainty. You're sure? Once this happens, there's no taking it back. Your parents will know everything, and that might make reconciliation harder, not easier. I'm sure. And surprisingly, I was. They need to confront their prejudice directly. Whether they choose to acknowledge it or not is up to them. All right then. Ron's smile held equal parts pride and concern. Guess we're getting dressed up next Saturday. Saturday arrived with the weight of inevitability, like a storm you've watched building on the horizon finally reaching shore. I stood in Ron's bedroom watching him transform. The process felt almost ritualistic. First the crisp white dress shirt, then the tailored black suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. He moved with practiced efficiency like someone who'd performed this transformation countless times, but never quite gotten comfortable with it. "Help me with this." He held out a silver tie and I realized my hands were shaking as I stepped forward. My fingers fumbled with the silk, and Ron covered my hands with his own, steadying them. "We don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Say the word and we stay home. Order takeout, watch terrible movies." "No." I got the tie properly positioned and began folding it into a Windsor knot, muscle memory from years of school dress codes taking over. "I need this. We need this." When I finished, I stepped back to take in the full picture. Ron looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread. Powerful, sophisticated, completely in control. But it was his eyes that held my attention, still carrying that same warmth and vulnerability I'd fallen for, unchanged by the expensive costume. "You look different," I said, "but also exactly the same." He smiled, understanding the contradiction I was trying to express. "The clothes don't change who I am. They're just another language I've learned to speak." The gala was held at the Riverside Convention Center, a massive glass and steel structure that overlooked the water. Luxury cars lined the curved driveway as we approached. Valets in crisp uniforms opening doors for men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns that probably cost more than semester's tuition. My own suit, borrowed from Ron's corporate wardrobe and altered to fit, felt like armor. As we stepped out of his car, not the motorcycle I'd grown accustomed to, but a sleek black sedan that matched the venue's expectations. "Ready?" Ron offered his arm and I took it, drawing strength from the contact. The moment we entered the grand ballroom, I felt the shift in atmosphere. Conversations paused mid-sentence as heads turned. Recognition rippled through the crowd like a wave. Not for me but for the man beside me. "Is that Ron Mercer?" someone whispered nearby. I heard he rarely attends these events. Brilliant mind, completely revolutionized cybersecurity protocols. His company just landed that massive government contract. The whispers built into a low hum of speculation and interest. Ron maintained a pleasant professional expression, nodding acknowledgement to people who caught his eye but not stopping to engage. His hand found the small of my back, a grounding touch that reminded me we were in this together. Then I saw them. Mom and Dad stood near the entrance, dressed in their formal best, wine glasses in hand. Mom noticed us first and I watched the color drain from her face as recognition hit. She grabbed Dad's arm, her grip tight enough that wine sloshed dangerously close to the rim of her glass. Dad followed her gaze and his expression cycled through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been dawning horror. They'd clearly seen the event program, knew Ron Mercer would be speaking, but hadn't connected that name to their son's thug boyfriend until this exact moment. Ron felt me tense and leaned in close. "Breathe. Let them process. We don't need to approach them." But I couldn't look away from my parents' faces as understanding crashed over them. Mom's free hand rose to her mouth. Dad's jaw worked soundlessly, his face flushing red, then pale, then red again. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice boomed through the sound system, "please take your seats. We'll begin shortly with remarks from our keynote speaker." Ron squeezed my hand once before releasing it. "I need to go backstage. Will you be okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He disappeared through a side door and I found my assigned seat, front row, center, exactly where the speaker's partner would be placed. The lights dimmed and the MC returned to the podium. "Tonight we're honored to host a speaker whose innovations have literally changed how we think about digital security. At just 28, he's built a company that protects critical infrastructure for governments and corporations worldwide. Please welcome Ron Mercer, founder and CEO of Mercer Security Solutions." Applause filled the room as Ron walked onto the stage, and I felt a surge of pride so intense it almost hurt. This was him, not the version my parents had judged, but another facet of the same complex person I loved. "Thank you for that generous introduction," Ron began, his voice carrying easily through the excellent acoustics. "I'm here tonight to talk about success, but probably not the way you expect." He launched into his speech, and I found myself captivated despite having heard pieces of his story before. He spoke about losing his parents at 16, about the foster system and homelessness, About teaching himself to code in public libraries because he couldn't afford a computer. Money changes how people see you, Ron said, his eyes scanning the crowd before finding mine. Before I had it, I was invisible. After I acquired it, I became a target. Everyone wanted something: investment, connections, access. I learned that wealth doesn't buy you real relationships. It just buys you better masks to hide behind. The audience hung on every word, but I was watching my parents. Mom's expression had shifted from shock to something softer, more complicated. Dad sat rigid, his face unreadable. Real strength isn't measured in dollars, Ron continued, his voice gaining intensity. It's measured in how you treat people when there's nothing to gain from being kind. It's in the communities you build, the hands you extend, the bridges you construct instead of the walls you erect. He spoke for 20 minutes, weaving together personal narrative with broader philosophy, challenging the audience's assumptions about success and worth. When he finished, the applause was thunderous, people rising to their feet. Ron returned to his seat beside me as the MC announced a brief intermission before dinner service. Almost immediately, we were surrounded: business leaders wanting introductions, university administrators expressing gratitude, society figures angling for connection. Ron handled it all with gracious professionalism, but I could feel the tension in his shoulders, the way he positioned himself slightly between me and the crowd as if protecting me from their intensity. Then the crowd parted, and my parents stood there, uncertain and uncomfortable in a way I'd never seen them. "Talon," Dad said, his voice rough. "We didn't realize." "Didn't realize what?" I kept my tone neutral, refusing to make this easy for them. "That Ron is successful, that he's respected, that your judgment was based entirely on superficial appearance." Mom flinched. Dad's face flushed, but before he could respond, Ron spoke. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison." His tone was polite but not warm, maintaining professional distance. "I appreciate the difficulty of this situation. We owe you an apology," Mom said quietly, her eyes rimmed with red. "Both of you, we were wrong." The words should have felt like vindication, but they landed flat. An apology offered under duress, forced by social embarrassment rather than genuine understanding. "Wrong about what specifically?" I pressed, needing them to articulate it, to acknowledge the depth of their prejudice. Dad cleared his throat. "We judged you, Ron, based on appearance. We made assumptions that were unfair and hurtful. We hurt our son in the process." He paused, seeming to struggle with the next words. "We failed as parents." The admission carried more weight than the apology. I felt Ron's hand find mine, his fingers intertwining with my own in silent support. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "But apologies don't erase the pain. You threw me out. You chose your prejudice over your son. We know." Mom's voice broke. "We know, and we're sorry. If we could take it back, but you can't." Ron's voice was gentle but firm. "What's done is done. The question is what happens now." The four of us stood in uncomfortable silence, surrounded by elegant strangers pretending not to eavesdrop on our family drama. "I think," I said slowly, "we all need time to process this. Tonight isn't the place for this conversation." Dad nodded, relief and disappointment warring on his features. Mom looked like she wanted to say more, but I turned away, Ron's hand warm and steady in mine as we moved toward the exit. Outside, the night air felt cool against my overheated skin. Ron led me to a quiet corner of the building's exterior, away from the valet stand and smoking guests. "How are you feeling?" he asked, studying my face in the ambient light from the building. "I don't know," I admitted. "They apologized, which is what I wanted. But it doesn't feel like enough." "Forgiveness is a journey," Ron said softly, "not a destination. You don't have to decide anything tonight." 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo after the gala, time moving forward while feeling suspended in amber. My parents called daily. Mom's messages ranged from heartfelt to desperate, Dad's from formal to pleading. I listened to voicemails without responding, read text without replying, caught between the child who craved their acceptance and the adult who recognized their apologies came from embarrassment rather than enlightenment. Ron never pushed me toward reconciliation or bitterness. He simply existed as a steady presence, reminding me through actions rather than words that I deserved unconditional acceptance. "They're still your family," he said one morning, over coffee, after I'd played him Mom's latest voicemail. "Whatever you decide, I support it. But don't torture yourself trying to decide. Let it unfold naturally. Easy advice to give, harder to follow. I was caught between longing and resentment, hope and self-protection. Then Mom showed up outside my afternoon lecture, waiting by the building entrance like she'd done when I was in elementary school. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by uncertainty in ways I'd never associated with her usual confidence. "I won't keep you long," she said when I approached. "But I wrote you something. Please, just read it. That's all I ask." She pressed an envelope into my hands and walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing there holding what felt like either an olive branch or another weapon. I didn't open it immediately. The envelope burned in my backpack through 2 more classes, through dinner with Ron at our favorite taco place, through the evening until he noticed me staring at my bag like it contained a live snake. "Want me to leave you alone to read it?" he offered. I shook my head. "Stay. I might need you after." The letter was handwritten on Mom's expensive stationery, her perfect cursive filling 3 pages front and back. "Dearest Talon," it began, and I had to pause, steadying my breathing. She wrote about failure, not mine, but hers and Dad's. About raising me with values while failing to embody them when tested. About letting fear of social judgment override love for their child. The letter didn't make excuses or justify their actions. Instead, it laid bare their flaws with painful honesty. "We taught you to see people as individuals," she wrote, then demonstrated the opposite when it mattered most. "We preached acceptance while practicing prejudice. We prioritized our comfort over your happiness. These aren't mistakes. They're fundamental failures of character that we need to acknowledge and address." The admission of actual wrongdoing, not just unfortunate misunderstanding, hit differently than the gala apology. She continued, explaining that she and Dad had begun seeing a family therapist, working through their biases and defensive patterns. Not to win me back, she emphasized, but because they'd recognized something broken in themselves that needed repair regardless of my response. "You don't owe us forgiveness," the letter concluded. "You don't owe us anything. But if someday you decide you want to rebuild our relationship, we'll be here, doing the work to deserve a second chance. We love you, we're proud of you, and we're sorry we made you doubt either of those truths." I set the letter down with shaking hands. Ron pulled me against his chest without speaking, just holding me while I processed. "They're in therapy," I said finally, my voice muffled against his shirt. "That's good." Ron's response was carefully neutral. Real work instead of just words. I pulled back to look at him. "What do you think I should do?" "I think," he said carefully, "that you should do whatever feels right for you, when it feels right. Not because of pressure or obligation or guilt, but because you genuinely want to." The non-answer frustrated me even as I appreciated his refusal to impose his opinion. "That's not helpful." "I know," he smiled slightly, "but this isn't my decision to make. They're your parents. Your relationship to repair or not repair." Over breakfast the next morning, Ron making elaborate omelets while I nursed coffee and uncertainty, I finally voiced what I'd been circling around. "I think I want to give them a chance. Not to go back to how things were, because that's impossible, but maybe to build something new." Ron set down his spatula and came around the counter to face me. "Then do that. But on your terms, at your pace, with clear boundaries. Will you come with me?" The question came out smaller than intended. "When I see them, I don't think I can face them alone yet. Anywhere, anytime." The promise held no hesitation. "I'm with you." We arranged to meet at my childhood home that Sunday afternoon. Neutral territory that was somehow also emotionally loaded ground. I spent the drive there gripping Ron's hand tight enough to hurt, my other hand pressed against my churning stomach. Dad answered the door, and for a moment we just looked at each other across the threshold. Then he stepped back, gesturing us inside with none of his usual commanding presence. He looked older, I realized, or maybe just more human. Mom appeared from the kitchen, flour dusting her hands. She'd been baking, something she only did when stressed or trying to make amends. The smell of chocolate chip cookies filled the house, achingly familiar. We settled in the living room, with careful distance maintained, everyone perched on furniture edges like we might need to flee at any moment. "Thank you for coming," Dad started, his voice formal. "We know we don't deserve your time after what we did." "No, you don't." I agreed, not sugarcoating it. "But I'm here because I want to understand if change is actually possible. Mom's eyes welled, but she didn't cry. We've been doing a lot of work. With Dr. Morrison, our therapist, she's helping us understand how our fear of judgment from our social circle became more important than supporting our own child. It's not an excuse, Dad added quickly. It's just the explanation. We let other people's opinions matter more than your happiness. That's unconscionable. Ron had been silent, but he spoke now, his tone measured. What specifically are you doing to address the underlying prejudices that led to this situation? Good question. I hadn't thought to ask it so directly, but it got to the heart of whether this was performative contrition or genuine growth. Dad and Mom exchanged glances before Dad answered. We've been attending diversity workshops through the community center, reading literature about bias and judgment, having uncomfortable conversations about our assumptions. It's not easy work, and we're not claiming to be fixed, but we're trying. We also, Mom added quietly, made donations in both your names to LGBTQ youth organizations, not for credit or recognition, but because we realized how many young people face what we put you through, and we wanted to do something meaningful. The gesture surprised me. Actions backing up words. Resources deployed toward broader good beyond just repairing their own family. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But I need you to understand, I'm not the same person who left here. That experience changed me. I can't go back to being the son who prioritized your approval over my own truth. We don't want you to, Mom said firmly. We want to know the person you're becoming, including the parts we failed to see before. The afternoon unfolded with careful conversation, cups of tea that went cold as we talked, cookies that mostly went uneaten. We discussed boundaries, my need for space and slow rebuilding, their desire to understand Ron beyond his balance sheet. Ron handled their questions with patient grace, talking about his work and philosophy, his garage community, what drew him to me. I watched my parents actually listen, asking follow-up questions that suggested genuine interest rather than interrogation. When Ron excused himself to take a business call, Mom seized the moment of privacy. He's extraordinary, she said softly. I'm ashamed we couldn't see that from the beginning. You saw tattoos and a motorcycle, I replied, and decided that was enough information. That's what needs to change. It has changed, Dad insisted. These weeks without you showed us what we'd lost by being so rigid. We don't want to lose you again, Talon. Whatever that requires, we're willing to do it. The declaration felt genuine, but I knew actions over time would be the real measure. When we finally prepared to leave, Mom pulled me into a hug that felt both familiar and foreign. Thank you for this chance, she whispered. We'll prove we deserve it. In Ron's car, driving away from the house that no longer felt like home but might someday feel like something new, I let out a breath I'd been holding for weeks. That went better than expected, Ron observed. It's a start, I agreed. Just a start. But maybe that's enough. He reached over, lacing his fingers through mine. You okay? More than okay, I said and meant it. I have you, I have the beginning of reconciliation with them. I have a future that looks nothing like I planned but feels right anyway. Ron squeezed my hand. Welcome to the life you actually want instead of the one you thought you should want. We drove into the evening, leaving behind the weight of the past while carrying forward the possibilities of the future. The road ahead remained uncertain, filled with challenges and continued healing. But for the first time since that terrible dinner weeks ago, I felt genuinely hopeful. My parents had failed me, but they were working to do better. Ron had shown me what unconditional support looked like, and I'd discovered that sometimes the family you choose matters just as much as the family you're born. Mine. The story didn't end with perfect resolution or happily ever after certainty. It ended with something more valuable, the honest, messy work of people trying to love each other better, to see past surfaces to the souls underneath, to build bridges across chasms of hurt and misunderstanding. It ended with possibility, and that I was learning was more than enough.